This is part 2 of my user's guide series. I'll probably do several videos after this because there's a lot of information to cover and I don't want to leave anything behind. I left off here with the 15 myths of composition in art and photography. I've talked about this before and I have another video about this before, but what the hell, we might as well go through it again because I feel strongly about these and all of these are based on reality. This is not myth or nonsense about composition. I see so much of this stuff online. You know what? I'll start with the first one. Let's get right to it. Composition in art is intuitive or random. This is absolute BS. Whether you're picking up a camera or you're going to the canvas with a brush, a pencil, it does not matter. You have to study and learn composition. None of this stuff is intuitive. Zero. And I've been shooting pictures for about 40 or 45 years now. I can tell you honestly, my work sucked before I learned this information, and I shot this way for 20 or 25 years. My work never improved, and if you're in the same boat I was, your work will never improve either because you need the visual literacy skills to be able to know what you're looking at. And it doesn't matter whether it's a camera, a pencil, or a paintbrush. Obviously, artists that go to the canvas, they use design grids. They have more time to lay out their compositions, so they tend to be a little bit more technically accurate. But with that said, the photographer still needs to understand all the concepts that I talk about on my website and in my user's guide, meaning figure-ground relationship, proper overlapping, the greatest area of contrast, just to name a few. There's a lot of them, but if you don't understand what you're looking at, you can't take a good photograph. Bruce Gilden talks about this in his street photography video on Magnum. He says a lot of these students that come to his workshop, they can't take a good photograph because they don't know what a good photograph is. This is all tied back to your visual literacy skills. It's like learning how to read a book. If you can't read, you don't know what you're looking at. The visual aspect of art, it's the same thing. So whenever I hear somebody come back with this nonsense, I brush it off, and my immediate thought is they're not trained, or if they are trained, they're not being honest about it. And there's a lot of that out there too, because I've come across a lot of artists that are Atelier trained and they're not open about what they're doing. But the reality is anybody that's Atelier trained is using the harmonic armature in some form or not. You don't go through 4 years of aggressive training, learning how to draw, paint, etc., and not learn design. It's just not a thing. And as William Schneider says in his composition video, if you don't have the technical skills of rendering, but you do have composition skills, your work will sell. If you have all the craftsmanship of learning how to paint and draw and take a photograph, but you don't have the composition skills, your work will never sell. Now, you can be cynical about that and say, well, I've sold things in the past, but it's nowhere near where you could be if you actually understood design. All right, let me move on from there. Number 2, composition can't be taught. I came across this in some lame photography website where an instructor said it's something that you're born with. That is absolute stupid. I mean, that truly defines dumb. Of course, you can learn composition like you can learn any other skill. Number 3, some people are born with the gift. I absolutely hate this one. It's so stupid. It really is. Nobody's born with any of these skills. Seriously. It's just not a thing. Number 4, design systems, design grids, and rules in composition kill creativity. Actually, it's the opposite. If you don't have these skills and you're an artist and you're not using grids, you're not being creative at all. Slapping paint on a canvas like Jackson Pollock, in a drunken rage, throwing down, splatter paint on a canvas, flat down on his lawn. I mean, that's 20th century stuff. That's not producing good art. Sorry, Jackson Pollock is a mess. I don't think anything he produced was art. When it came to the stuff that sold, that is all basically marketing. It's propaganda. It's nonsense. Number 5, design systems and design grids make art appear too rigid. Again, kind of falls in line with number 4. Nonsense. That's not true because the harmonic armature has an infinite amount of variety, which means you can go anywhere you want with it. You can use it a little, you can use it a lot. It doesn't matter. Number 6, photographers don't need to study design because they shoot on the fly. I understand where this comes from, but nothing could be further from the truth. You need to have those visual literacy skills. You need to understand figure-ground relationship, overlapping, proper overlapping. Because I have to tell you, in all the years I've been studying this information, there are two mistakes that photographers make that ruin their images, and you cannot fix them in post-processing. That's good figure-ground relationship and good overlapping. If you screw those two things up, your photograph is a throwaway. It's no good. You might as well throw it to the recycle bin because you can't fix it. Moving on, number 7, the rule of thirds is the best system of design. The rule of thirds is a legitimate concept, and it stems from the harmonic armature. It's just a few divisions in the harmonic armature. It's pretty lame, but it's a legit thing. The problem with it is it doesn't give you any flexibility at all. So once you've learned it, it's like playing the game tic-tac-toe. It becomes severely boring, and your work becomes boring. Number 8, the rule of thirds is used everywhere in advertising. That statement comes from somebody who is not trained in design. Number 9, the rule of thirds grid is derived from the golden section rectangle. It's actually, like I said, it's derived from the harmonic armature. All right, number 10, the rule of thirds allows the artist to be creative with their compositions. Nonsense, so move on. 11, the rule of thirds can be traced back to classical and Renaissance paintings. I have changed my mind a little bit about this because it depends on how you look at it. The harmonic armature goes back many hundreds of years. So I guess in that regard, the rule of thirds, because it's derived from the harmonic armature, you could say that. So I'll go pass on that one. You should avoid placing your subject in the center of a composition. That's not necessarily true, even though I do still hear it. It's all about the design. Number 13, you need to be great at math to master the art of composition. Barnstone proved this very clearly in his DVDs. You don't need to pull out a calculator to do composition. It's a physical geometry. Number 14, famous photographers' quotes are a great source for learning composition. I can't, this kind of comes from the Eric Kim generation of photographers. That guy would create all these so-called inspirational, handbooks on how to take great photographs. But the reality is none of them had any, solid information on composition in them. I'm sorry. They're interesting from the motivational standpoint, and he was very good at that, but as far as learning anything, not really. Number 15, photographers can learn composition from photography websites. Absolutely not. Photography websites are the worst place you can go to learn anything respectable when it comes to design. It's interesting because I've seen other teachers try to go into that market on the photography websites like, Petapixel, and the information gets slammed. And some of that is because the presentation kind of sucks, and it's all about dynamic symmetry, which is, kind of become not a thing in photography. That's pretty much a dead thing in photography. But the reality is just no matter what's on photography websites, they're just not very good at all. They're pretty much useless. All right, the importance of the armature of the rectangle. Now, when you're talking about artists that go to the canvas, it's more important than, say, the photographer, because the photographer's not going to go around with plastic grids on their camera, and I've seen this a lot, and it's fine for the beginner if you want to slap the grid on your camera just to see what you can get. But the reality is, in photography, you need more flexibility than that. It's just not practical. I was on Amazon and I saw somebody selling these things, and there's another website that teaches dynamic symmetry that sells this stuff. Whatever. It's truly not a thing. Brazon never used them. He laughed at the idea. So that's not a thing either. But, to understand the armature, it is important whether you slap a grid on your camera or not, because in photography, you can use them to analyze your art if you want to. The artist that draws and paints, it's critical. You can't get away with producing a solid work of art, on a canvas or on a sketch pad, just randomly placing stuff. And I've seen artists, by the way, that do this. They'll, have their painting and they'll drop a grid on it. For example, if somebody paints a painting, they'll drop a grid on and go, see, things sort of line up, so I'm born with this. Nope, it doesn't work that way at all. A few things might line up, but the spacing of the lines, the verticals, horizontals, and the diagonals, they don't match up. And when it comes to design for the artist that draws and paint, it is a lot more harmonic than that. Having a few lines line up because you decide to place a grid on something you did intuitively is not proof that you're good at this intuitively. It's nonsense. It truly is not a thing. And I can look at anybody's work and I can tell who understands design and who's using a grid just by looking at it. I can tell because I'm looking at the spacing between the verticals and the horizontal lines. They're harmonious. They're exact. They're not random. So it is important. Again, in photography, it's a little bit different because you're applying the information differently, but it still holds true. So, all right, the harmonic armature is related to musical theory. You've got 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4 notes. It's the visual interpretation of music. Juliet Aristides talks about this in her book, Classical Painting Atelier. And I just give a few examples. Throughout the user's guide, I give examples of what the artist is doing with the harmonic armature, where they're getting their divisions, the diagonals that are coming into play, and so forth. Like here, I get a lot of information from Connor Walton's website because he's very transparent about what he's doing. He's rolling the grid out on his canvas, and then he's sketching the pairs within the armature. He's using the armature to design. And I've looked at a lot of his work, and he uses it in every one that I can tell. It's not something he's randomly doing. But I have a lot of examples like that. Prologue, it's just my ideas on design in general. What is artistic style? I think a lot of people get this confused. I think when I consider my own artistic style, it's what I like to shoot. It's how I shoot it. It's my subject matter that I pick. That kind of falls into the artistic style side of it. But that really doesn't have anything to do with learning techniques. Learning the techniques and understanding composition, I think, is a separate issue. Okay, I learned the information and then I use my style in my photographs. So I always separate the two out, but that's just how I view it. Why compose? Again, as I've said a few minutes ago, without composition, there's no art. Kenyon Cox said this in his book and so on. What I did throughout this user's guide, I have some examples from other books that talk about composition and some elements of composition. And here, for example, like I just said, this is a section from Kenyon Cox's book on art and composition. It's a good book. I happen to pull out the section on design, composition, because I think it's the best section of the book. But you can download it by clicking here. You can find it online for free. It's called The Classic Point of View. All right, the art of seeing and visual literacy. Again, you're teaching yourself how to see. All right, you're learning a visual language. It's not something that comes to you intuitively or God handed down to you when you were born. If you think that, I almost see that as somewhat arrogant, because when you understand how much there is about composition and what it takes to shoot a good photograph or to produce a good work of art on a canvas, to think that you're born with that, it really is. It's sort of, it's condescending to me. You're not. You can't be. All right, teaching visual literacy in K through 12. Again, just some more information on how it's taught, where it's taught, and so forth. And I do have recommendations on podcasts, etc. In this section here, I talk about the design in the 20th century modern art movement. This is where design went away. This is where composition went away, and it was turned in for this nonsense of, just do what you feel. If you feel it, it's good composition. That, again, no. And I have a few more articles about, just artistic theory and so forth, art speak, the nonsensical language of modernism. With modern art, you go to these museums and they write up all these, essentially, to me, it's woke stuff, right? It's just babble about what the art's supposed to say to you. But the reality is the art is nothing. It's an empty, clear box. Joe Rogan talks about it on his podcast. I even have a clip of him talking about modern art. It's absolute, it's crap. It's just nothing. It's nonsense. It is a gimmick. It is a scam. All right, art can't be taught. This was by Mandy Tice, and I read this years ago. I thought it was an exceptional essay on, people that think art can't be taught, and she proves basically that whole ideology is nonsense. The importance of looking back, meaning basically you can't disregard the art skills that came before you. And that's what the modern art movement does. All right, I think I'm going to stop here because this has been going on for about 15 minutes. Sorry to ramble like this, but I want to cover everything thoroughly, so I'll pick this up in another video. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.